Despite everything you've been hearing about the job market, layoffs, AI taking jobs, tech is still hiring. And even though I've made my own video about my own layoff and a video about my concerns about AI, I did manage to land a job in this job market in 2026 with only 3 years of experience. So that just goes to show that you do not have to be a unicorn to land a job in this job market. And beyond my own experience, the data also does support this. We all know that during COVID, there was a massive overhiring of jobs in the tech field. At its peak, jobs were 132% over the pre-COVID baseline. And in the past few years, we've seen a massive undoing of that. But in May of 2025, that trend did hit its lowest point, and since then, we've been slowly and steadily increasing back to pre-COVID baselines. As of March 2026, we're at about 72%, which means we are slowly but steadily working our way back to the pre-COVID baseline. But of course, if you're only focusing on the headlines and things that people are talking about LinkedIn, it is really hard to have some optimism about the current state of things. But I'm here to tell you that it is possible. I did land a job in 2026, and in this video, I'm going to go over every single question that I encountered in my software engineering interview cycle. That way, you can be better prepared in your interviews. I'm going to cover the coding, system design, and behavioral questions that I got during my interviews at some of the major tech companies. I'll also share the trends that I noticed. That way, you can better create your study plan when you're preparing. Okay, so let's start with the coding questions. Across the companies that I interviewed for at mid-level, I noticed that there were 3 common areas of problems that I was asked. This was recursion, graphs, and object-oriented programming. Something to note is that I didn't get any LeetCode hard style questions, like the ones that are supposed to be trick questions and you need to know some super niche algorithm to be able to solve it. I didn't get any of those, but I did notice across all of the companies that I interviewed for, the main focus was knowing your data structures down and being able to very, very quickly figure out which one you need to use for the problem. So to the specific problems that I got, the first one was path sum. So given a target sum, I had to traverse through a binary tree and figure out if there was some combination of the nodes that added to the target sum. This one was pretty simple. I was able to solve this with a DFS search and recursion, and I was able to get the solution, but my interviewer did ask me to optimize it. So always make sure, even if you know the first solution, make sure that you can find the optimal solution and make sure that you can actually explain why that would be the case. Next, I had a BFS, DFS level order traversal question. So given an adjacency list of boards and topics, I had to basically manipulate the initial structure to create complementary structures, which could help me figure out which topics were related to which topics and basically the relationships between the different items. This one was pretty straightforward as well, but again, you need to make sure that you have your graph algorithms down because I did not have a lot of time to actually sit and think about what algorithm I should use. Another problem that I got was a matrix problem. I actually really despise these problems, but I was given a starting coordinate point, and given that point, I had to move in these 6 cardinal directions. So up, down, left, right, diagonals in all directions. And then I had to move as far as possible until I reached the last valid point that was the last valid point within the boundaries of the matrix. So this one, again, wasn't too complicated, but you definitely needed to know how to easily traverse a matrix. I wasn't too strong on this, so I wasn't actually able to finish this problem. For object-oriented programming, I got 3 problems like this. So I got one where I had to design an elevator system. So I had to define an elevator class, which given a starting floor could check all of the elevators and evaluate which should move up or down to get the person standing on the given floor. The second object-oriented programming problem that I got was to create Minesweeper. I had to basically define functionality to display the game, to allow the user to play the game, to restart the game, and all of that stuff. This one I think was actually a little bit tough to solve if you've never played Minesweeper before. I had played it, but not in a long time, so that one was actually pretty challenging for me. And lastly, I got a problem to create a banking application. So I had to define a class which had functionality to deposit funds, withdraw funds, and transfer funds between accounts. For preparation, I did LeetCode 75, and I think that was perfect in terms of getting comfortable with all the different data structures and algorithms. I would suggest, if you have time, dedicating like 1 day to each section, because that's what I did, and I felt like that gave me a lot of time to actually build up the intuition behind using the different algorithms. After I finished the LeetCode 75, then I went back and I did blind questions. That way I could practice actually doing a problem without knowing what algorithm needed to be used. In LeetCode 75, you already know what algorithm needs to be used. You just have to implement it. So I found that doing the blind questions afterwards was helpful in making sure that I could really practice that quick recall. Another thing I would say is that LeetCode 75 doesn't have a lot of object-oriented programming problems. So definitely seek those out if you can, because I did notice that a trend across the companies. They were focusing a little bit more on your understanding of class structure, solid principles in programming that would more happen on the day-to-day versus like the brain teaser LeetCode problem style. Okay, so system design. The first question I got in my system design was to design a banking system. So pretty self-explanatory. I had to design a system that was able to process transactions, store them, and then make them available for things like reporting and auditing. The next problem I got was to design a cloud storage system. This is similar to Google Storage, where you have to design a system where a user can sign up and say how much storage they want provisioned, and then you create the system plane that identifies where that free storage is, provisions it, allocates it to the user, and then manages that over time. And lastly, I had to design a data pipeline. So essentially I had to design a system that was able to pull a bunch of data from S3, process it, and then generate an output file. Overall, I would say pretty fair questions for the system design. Again, nothing too crazy here. In terms of studying, what I did was I just watched as many system design videos as I could on YouTube. So I tried to cover all of the main applications, like how is Twitter designed, how is Instagram designed, how is YouTube designed, and you can kind of break down all of the system design questions into relatively few amount of buckets. I used Hello Interview as a sort of study plan because they break down the common system design interview into different modules, and then you can study that way. Another resource that I found really helpful was doing mock interviews on Leopard.FYI. So Leopard.FYI is a women and non-binary engineering community that I joined during my job search. And basically how it works is you sign up to be in the community and you meet with one of their staff, and they ask you a bunch of different questions about what you're looking for in your job search in terms of role, experience, salary, things like that. And then you get entered into their community, and they will match you with their company partners as you're going through the hiring process. So while you're in the community, you have access to all of their resources. They have mock interviews throughout the entire week. So a few times I did the system design interview, which was really helpful to get real life practice with that. And it was also a great place to find real life people if you wanted to study with as well. So definitely check out that resource. I found it really helpful in my job search, and I'll link Leopard.FYI and Hello Interview below. So lastly, the behavioral questions. The trend that I noticed during my behavioral interviews was that a lot of the questions were focused on negative experiences that I had. So for example, tell me a time you received difficult feedback, tell me a time you disagreed with someone, tell me a time that you balanced competing priorities. And this is definitely an important thing that I would say to look out for, is practicing answering those types of questions without making yourself look bad. So for example, if you have to talk about a time that you disagreed with someone, you don't want to give a story that makes you look like you don't know how to do your job, or that you're combative, or that you're not collaborative. So it definitely is a skill that you need to practice to be able to reframe those stories in a good light. Another trend that I noticed during my interviews is that interviewers would ask me a question, and then I would give them an entire story, and then they would be like, okay, that's great, tell me another time this happened. And a few times that did catch me off guard, and I had to take some time to think about another story. So definitely make sure that you have several stories per category. One thing that I did during my preparation that I found really helpful was I would use Claude to generate my stories, and I would give it my resume, give it the company I was applying for, and then I would ask it to create strong stories that I could say during a behavioral interview. And then to take it one step further, I would then ask Claude to basically break them down into the major question categories categories. So like I said, most commonly you're gonna get asked questions about difficult feedback, collaboration. And so I had Claude organize all of my stories into the different categories so that for each category, I would have at least 2 to 3 stories to talk about. Then one last trick that I did was I would type that all out on a sticky note and keep it on my screen whenever I went into a behavioral interview. That way, when I got asked a question, I could just look down at my sticky note and be like, okay, I already know exactly what story I'm gonna talk about. So overall, I went through 3 full interview cycles and had a handful of open assessments. I would say compared to other markets, it is pretty competitive. I cannot lie about that, but it is not impossible. I think in this market, you just need a bit of a different strategy. And for me, that was being very diligent about my studying and taking enough time so that I felt like I could put my best foot forward in each of my interviews, because it is hard to get a lot of interviews nowadays. So like I said, I had 3 full ones, and I really, every time I stepped in there, I was like, okay, I need to be 100% prepared for this. That being said, I did fail 2 of my full interview cycles. So if you're in your interview cycle right now and you're feeling defeated, just know that you only need 1 win. And if you keep working at it, you're going to get something eventually. At the end of the day, interviewing is a skill in itself. So the more reps that you put in, the better that you're going to get at them. If you found this helpful in any way, please let me know in the comments. I really appreciate all the positive comments that people have left for me. I'm very, very happy that I can share my experience and make it be helpful to other people. So as always, thank you for watching and see you next time.